Good evening, dear students of second year English literature. Today we're going to have an introduction to William Shakespeare's drama. William Shakespeare's drama or plays follows a standard structure of an exposition followed by a complication of events and then ended with a resolution of the main climax or the major conflict of a play, and deal with threats too. Basically, his plays deal with threats too, or disruption of. Disruption means disturbance, interruption of something, and established social order. What is the established social order that a play can delineate or discuss? It may be a kingdom, it may be a simple family life, a religious institution, for example. So his dramatic legacy consists of three categories. He wrote three different types of plays. He wrote comedies, tragedies, and historical plays, or what we call histories. The kind of comedy he writes is called romantic comedy, and in the following section we will differentiate between the different types of plays he wrote, whether they are romantic comedies, tragedies, or histories. And a romantic comedy, and from its title, romantic comedy, it is part romantic and part comedy. And I say that because it's romantic, people fall in love with each other, a male person and a female character. Out of this kind of romantic relationship arises a kind of folly, problems, mistakes. So in a romantic comedy, life is portrayed as proceeding as usual at the beginning, at the exposition. But later on, various characters fall hopelessly in love. In the play we are going to study this year, and maybe one more, As You Like It, we find different love relationships, about 4 relationships. The most important of all and the most apparent is that relationship between Orlando, the hero, and the heroine, Rosalind. So life in romantic comedy is proceeding as usual, but then various characters fall hopelessly. Why hopelessly? Because certain forces within the society threatens this kind of relationship, and so they began to feel hopeless about the development of their relationship. They ask questions about whether their love is going to witness a normal ending by marriage or not. In this kind of relationship, within that romantic comedy being presented on the stage, the central section of the play, which is a climax of course, focuses on the comic misfortunes of love. So out of love emerges certain misfortunes, and these misfortunes are comic. Because why are they comic? We laugh at these misfortunes. We laugh at the follies committed by lovers who feel that the relationship is not going to complete or finish as traditionally. But we, as readers or audiences, know that these problems or predicaments they have are not eternal. One day they are going to end. So, romantic comedy demonstrates how people's capacity for irrational behavior, their ability to behave irrationally without wisdom, okay, their irrational behavior and folly and mistakes, all of these can disrupt, can disturb, can interrupt the flow of harmony in a settled social order within the state or the country. These problems which they face, however, are soon resolved at the end. We know that these problems are going to be resolved at the end, but the characters, of course, not. The plays end with the social harmony of marriage and a dance, for example. These are the signs, the marks of a happy ending at the end of any of Shakespeare's romantic comedies, by the way. Of course, this type of plot is found in As You Like It, A Midsummer Night's Dream, another romantic comedy, and The Twelfth Night. All three are examples of romantic comedies. If we would like to move on to discuss another dimension of Shakespeare's dramatic legacy, we have to focus on the language used by Shakespeare. It's very important, the language he uses in his dramaturgy. His language is full of imagery, which makes the themes of his plays come to life. And remember that the themes he discusses in his plays and presented on his stage are abstract concepts or ideas like love, hatred, dishonesty, betrayal, friendship, okay, and so. By so doing, he brings out the full implications of the plots. These plots, of his romantic comedies, these plots highlight the anarchic element in people's personalities. These plots show to the reader that peoples are innately anarchic in nature regarding such relationships of love, hatred with other people, and such ideas or such attitudes can disrupt the social order of the place where they live. Such ideas are always implicit, hidden, clearly unstated. Okay, so they are implicit in such romantic comedy. But Shakespeare's language, on the other hand, brings out, shows clearly, extracts, unearths, okay, extracts and explores these implications, these hidden ideas within the plot. An apparent example is Malvolio's criticism. Of course, Malvolio is one of the characters in his romantic comedy entitled The Twelfth Night. Okay, an example of this is Malvolio's criticism of the other characters in one of the scenes, when he says, and I quote, "My masters, are you mad? Or what are you? Have you no wit?" He exclaims or wonders if they are mad, gone mad, no wit, no mind, no thought. manners, behavior, he means, nor honesty, but to gabble like tinkers at this time of night, like drunkards, late like this. Do ye make an ill house of my lady's house? You turn my lady's house, the lady of the house, into an inn for having drinks. So, this image of madness, drinking, noise, and the whole idea of overturning social order, of course, madness and drinking and doing something bad like this disrupts the social order of the society, the normal behavior of people at the time. And this reflects the general theme of the play of rational and irrational behavior in society. Thus, Shakespeare's language isn't merely advancing the action, but constantly addressing the major issues of the play. That's very important. In Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice and Measure for Measure, two other great comedies written by Shakespeare, we find a different type. Both are not romantic comedies, but what we call tragic comedies. In both, romantic comedy and a tragic comedy, we find that there are some people who are in love and face some kind of difficulties. However, whereas the pure romantic comedy takes place in an imaginary world, okay, tragic comedies take place in a more realistic world where young lovers come in conflict with those in authority. And this conflict might cause even death. Okay? So, a romantic comedy is set in an imaginary world, whereas the tragic comedy is set in a more realistic environment. Romantic or tragic comedies, in these plays, we find Shakespeare examining how a society attempts to control its subjects, to dominate its subjects. And by the word subjects, I mean its people, its individuals. In this kind of tragic comedy, there is always the threat of the lovers being punished, even put to death, for their reckless behavior, because their behavior threatens the society, and thus the society punishes them with death even. In all Shakespeare's plays, there are some speeches in which the characters comment on the broader implications of the situations in which they find themselves. These speeches range from a soliloquy to a monologue to an aside. The best known examples are Hamlet's soliloquies. What is a soliloquy? A soliloquy is a long speech delivered by one of the characters, and he is alone on the stage. Of course, that speech is delivered regarding a major question or a major crisis of the play. The purpose of such speeches, soliloquies, is to reflect on the wider significance of the action. They relate to the major plot of the play. They raise all the difficult questions about people and their role in the society and even the world. Soliloquies, however, do not alone underline the broader themes of the play. So they are not enough. Every line of dialogue may touch upon the deeper issues of that play being portrayed on the stage or presented on the stage. Let's dwell again on exploring the language used by Shakespeare in his plays. You know, the time when Shakespeare used to write was the two centuries, the 16th and the 17th centuries. This time was one when the English language was being enriched from all directions, from all over the world. The English people had recently established colonies in the New World, in America, and merchant ships regularly traded through Europe, the Middle East, and the Far East even. So Shakespeare absorbed quantities very much. He absorbed quantities, many words, of new words, and invented even many others. From these words which he invented, for example, I remember the word circumstantial, disgraceful, immediacy, investment, lonely even, and worthless. All of these he invented from those borrowings which came from other parts of the world. He also increased the flexibility of the language, giving old words new shades of meaning. He gave new meanings to older words, okay? And letting nouns serve as verbs, and verbs serve as nouns, adjectives as nouns, and nouns as adjectives, and the like. And, for example, when a character says, I'll thither, Thither, or my often rumination wraps me in a most humorous sadness. I'd like also to refer to some of the words which can cause a lot of confusion to the student, to the reader even, which is, for example, the use of the word you and thou, thou, the second person pronoun. In Elizabethan times, you, this pronoun, was regarded as the polite form of address, addressing someone, while thou, thou, was the familiar form of the same pronoun. So the question now arises, which is, when are we supposed, or they at the time, are supposed to use you, and when is thou more appropriate? The general rule was that superiors or superior people, highly ranked people, the upper class of the society, beginning from top, the king, the prince, the princess, the queen, a nobleman, rich man, okay? These superiors were addressed for or by using the word you, while inferior people, common people, rustics, for example, were addressed as thou. For example, an employer would address his or her servant as thou, and the servant would address his master, his employer, by you. This convention, this tradition, seemed to be that the socially superior person could show familiarity with the underling, but such familiarity or affection wasn't to be reciprocated, exchangeable. No. A good example is found in The Merchant of Venice, which I have already mentioned as an example of tragic comedies. In The Merchant of Venice, Portia, one of the female characters, the lady of the house, she addresses her waiting woman, her servant, Nerissa, her name, as thou. She says, and I quote, I pray thee overname them, and as thou namest them, I will describe them. On the other hand, Nerissa addresses her mistress, her lady, as you. She says, how say you by the French lord Monsieur Le Bon? This is an extract from the original text. And a fellow servant in another situation, a servant who is lower in rank in the social order of that place, as thou, addressed by thou. Quick, quick, I pray thee, draw the curtain straight. So, thou is the subjective pronoun. For example, thou art the king's son. Thou is the subjective pronoun. The pronoun in the subjective mood as the subject. في حالة الفاعل, it is thou. Thee in the objective pronoun case. Thee is the objective pronoun. في حالة المفعول. Thy is the possessive adjective. في حالة الملكية, it is thy. And thine is the possessive pronoun without being followed by any name or word. So we have thou, thee, thy, and thine. Generally speaking, you serve it as the plural, but occasionally you will encounter in his plays, Shakespeare's plays, the much older ye. Ye is much older than you. Sometimes you will find ye in the middle of a line in Shakespeare's plays. And when he uses ye, it is used especially by older characters. Okay? As, for example, in another play called The Tempest, when one of the characters called Prospero says, ye elves, ye is ye. It is you, but older people uses ye. Ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes, and groves, and so to the end of the line. And so he uses, this character who is old uses ye instead of you. Thou was also used as an expression of affection among people of the same class. So when there is an affectionate relationship between two people who belong to the same class, they use thou. Juliet, for example, in Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, when she first meets Romeo, she says politely, remember, she uses you, which is the polite form of addressing someone, okay, because she is first meeting him, they meet for the first time. She says, good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much. But later on, when they become very acquainted with each other, when they fall in love with each other, Look, what does she use? You do look, what does she use? When she is on her balcony addressing Romeo down there, she speaks in an affectionate way. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore, art thou? Why art thou, Romeo? So she didn't use the pronoun you, but thou, because they are now very acquainted with each other, know what each other quite well in a love relationship. Uh, One more example is when Richard II says to his uncle, hast thou, according to thy oath and bond, so and so and so. So he uses the word thou instead of you. He addresses him affectionately, and so he uses thou instead of you. So this usage of this pronoun thou is used when there is a kind of affection between two characters. Such usage can range between the familiar and the polite, varying with the strength of the bond, according to the strength of the bond or the connection relationship. For example, when Claudius speaks to Laertes in Hamlet, he says, he uses you. You can't speak of reason to the Dane. The Dane means the Danish. And lose your voice. What was it thou, Laertes, that shall not be my offer, not thy asking? So according to the bond or the connection, the relationship between both sides, the language is determined. One more dimension of language which is very apparent in the plays written by Shakespeare is the use of the word sir, sir, Sayyidi, S-I-R, or Sarah. Sometimes we find Sarah, S-I-R-R-A-H. Okay, sir is clearly a term of respect, of politeness. Unless, of course, the context makes it clear that it is being used sarcastically or as an order or something like that. So, sir is used when you are addressing someone with respect, with politeness. Sarah, on the other hand, makes it clear that the speaker is addressing an inferior person, just like you and thou. In The Merchant of Venice, again, as Portia exits in one of the scenes, she speaks to her waiting woman, to the servant, by come, Nerissa, and to her serving man, servant, Sarah. She says, she calls him by Sarah, go before. Another example is found in Henry IV, Part 1. When King Henry addresses Hotspur, one of the characters, as you, in recognition of his noble rank, he uses you. But when it appears that Hotspur is resisting the king's order to bring him the Scottish leaders, prisoners at the time, the king addresses him by thou because he disobeyed his orders. And he says, thou dost belie him. Percy, art thou not ashamed? So he useth thou. Now let's move on to another point. We have already discussed Shakespeare's comedies, romantic comedies and tragic comedies, his language he uses throughout his plays. Let's now move to speak about his tragedies and histories. You know, Shakespeare's genius playwriting that which is best proved by his histories and tragedies. In such plays, there is always a character. His plays is built on that plan. He uses this plan, the following plan. There is always a character, usually a king, who is, who is no longer fulfilling his traditional role. He breaks the code drawn for a king, a traditional type of king at that time. He breaks the code. He breaks the social order, the position or the function he is expected to perform. And so he finds himself in a dilemma, either because his own disposition, his own intention, his own plans becomes at odds with, in contradiction with, what is traditionally expected of him. So he violates the roles of the kingdom. And so he faces many difficulties, many dilemmas. Okay, this is one reason. Or because, because unruly forces, brutal forces, okay, around him at court or in the country are threatening and undermining his authority, attempt to take control from the king. The history plays deal with issues about people and sociopolitical order. The tragedies tackle more basic issues about the whole purpose of existence. And so his tragedies are more universal. And by so they are more famous than histories or historical plays or even romantic comedies. In that type of plays, the tragedies, people ask whether there is any meaning in life. What are their positions in life or functions? Let's go back to the histories he wrote. His historical plays present an ideal notion of kingship. A king who is portrayed ideally. But there is an idea that is being dramatized about the inevitability of social disorder. There is an ideal person, the king, who is rolling over the country as usual, as expected to him. But there is always some idea being dramatized that there is an inevitability of a social disorder which stems from the feelings and ambitions of individuals, of the king or a prince or a princess, a queen, who always disrupt the socio-political life of their countries. This ideal notion is of a responsible king. A responsible king. A king at the time was viewed as being appointed, assigned by God, who governs justly, governs his kingdom justly in a secure and safe way and in an ordered society. But there are always problems that prevent this ideal of social order from becoming real. Cannot be real. For example, in Richard II, written in 1995, there is a king who claims divine authority and authority drawn from God. God has, he claims, God has appointed me as king. But his personality and actions, his behavior and deeds make him totally, completely inadequate, inefficient to fulfill the ideal role. He is trying to say God has appointed him as king. In other plays, such as this series of Henry, he wrote a series of plays entitled Henry the Fourth, the Fifth, the Sixth, and so. However, the king is a competent figure, very powerful figure, king. And in this case, it is not the folly or the mistake of the king. He tries and does his best to fulfill his role, his ideal role as a king appointed by God. But in this type of plays, in this series, Henry the Fourth, the Fifth, it is the rebels, al-mutamarridun, the rebels in the country, including, by the way, including a comic rebel called Falstaff, who challenges and undermines the authority of the king. In Henry the Fourth, for example, part 1, by the way, this character, Falstaff's his speeches, with their total lack of respect for authority and discipline, undermine the very idea that there can be order in the society, in this state. And King Henry discusses with his son, called Hal, the whole question of kingship. Such scenes reveal the thoroughness with which Shakespeare presents and explores the problem of people's weakness. It is a very good situation, very good opportunity in which Shakespeare presents his idea to the audience that people are weak by nature, are unruly by nature, and this makes them incompetent to take the roles, to establish order in the society. The same issues are apparent in Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra and other plays by Shakespeare. In the next lectures, we are going to concentrate on discussing our major play under analysis, which is As You Like It. We will follow the structure of the play, the exposition, the complication, the climax, the following action, and the resolution, as usual, as we have been accustomed to from last year. And we will discover the major themes negotiated or discussed by Shakespeare in this romantic comedy, inshallah. See you soon.